Hi, friends. So we're going to look at pop, especially American artists here. We'll begin looking at Andy Warhol. Born in Pittsburgh, um, died here in New York. Well, died in New York. I'm here in New York right now. I'll take you back. So Andy, a little backstory, right? He begins making a living as a commercial artist. He did ads for shoes, did window designs, and he um, started getting some notoriety for his kind of commercial illustration. And it wasn't until um, really the 1960s, early 1960s, and this is one of the early pieces, he began to take source material directly from other advertisements. Um, this was an ad for plastic surgery before and after. And so Andy just painted it. Um, and in doing, right, it's a little bit different than Rauschenberg and Johns, where we saw their hand, right? There was an intimacy to Rauschenberg. We don't see that here. And it's a very direct and immediate translation of source material. So here, Marilyn Diptych, and um, here he's taking a image of a famous, actress, and he's silk screening it. So one of the production tools is silk screen. That a silk screen completely removes his hand. It's the ink is being squeegeed through a screen, and um, it's the image deteriorates a little bit over time, and to some extent he was very interested in how long can you use an image before it um, doesn't have any meaning. It's completely devoid. Um, and so some of his source material is also consumable goods. And in this sense, all the varieties of Campbell soup cans are given homage here. Everything you can pick whatever you like, from the clam chowder to the chicken soup, um, the minestrone, and and you might read into it. We might think it's a critique of capitalist industrial America, but it's also just looking at a different source material. Now, this, I'd like you to think about it in the same way we just looked at these, right? Is that this is an electric chair um, that comes from a black and white photograph from a newspaper that is being reprinted now with screen printing ink. Okay? Again, his hand isn't there. As a designer, he is choosing colors. He's making this way bigger. He's translating the image into a different scale, but he's really not interfering with the image at all. He's not interpreting it. Here's another one, pink car crash. So these were images that would be in the newspaper. It's pretty graphic, and in a lot of ways, we may have sanitized. For the most part, we've sanitized a lot of our news feeds. Um, we can play around with um, interpreting whether this type of shocking material is some sort of commenting on society, but Andy took no such stance. Here's another one, green car crash. So he's using multiples, is the repeating of it. He's turning it into a type of patterned vocabulary of aesthetics. So the tree, the car, they become almost like marks, except that he's doing it solely with mechanical reproduction. He does this by reproducing the Brillo box. Some Campbell's, Del Monte, peaches. Ketchup. So here we'll look at Roy Lichtenstein. Um, he comes from a similar background from Warhol, but he was more he studied more Cubists. He looked at a lot at Moreau and even the Fauvists. Paul Klee. He was a professor, so he wasn't working as commercially. And then once he kind of fell into looking at comic books as inspiration, his career took off. Um, and how he approached the subject matter is really interesting. Um, so here's Girl with a Ball, and I guess I'm gonna go to the end of this first. I'm going to um, just show you a mirror painting. So when he looked at a mirror, he was translating that mirror. He was taking it out of reality, right, and abstracting it. Interesting. It's kind of easier to see with a mirror because a mirror is already an abstraction, um, in the sense that it abstracts an image that we see ourselves in. Um, but really, he was looking at everything, whether it was a comic book image. It wasn't reality that he was depicting. He first looked at it as an abstraction, even if it was representational. For him, it was an abstraction. And there's probably some real interesting truth to that, is that the moment we begin to translate it, right, we have to abstract it. Drowning Girl here. So he found these moments, right, that would be part of a comic, these scenes, and blow them up, and they become more melodramatic and gigantic, um, and I think that just as Andy was looking at some of the consumer culture, Lichtenstein was looking at narratives and how small pieces of a narrative, when it stands alone, kind of speaks a different um, truth. It kind of presents reality, um, and we know it's part of something larger. Um, we know this is part of a larger comic strip, right? Wham. Um, Possibly he's critiquing American culture, just as possibly Andy's critiquing American culture, but doing so just solely, directly, right, and in a way immediately translating the source material. This is a little pixelated here as I open fire. And again, we see a parenthesis here. We know something's before, we know something's after. And it's being translated at a larger scale. Um, I'm going to make this a little bigger for you. Um, this is hopeless. And if we look down here, we've got Ben-Day dots, right? They're used in newspaper printing and comic books, and you can see the dots themselves. And so he's using this technique of reproduction, right? That's actually being used in the source material. And he's directly translating that just on a larger scale and taking it to some extent out of context, but it's really a direct translation on a larger scale. That said, it's edited, and he's picking what to edit, how to edit it, in terms of which frames to show or not show. And he uses this as a drawing technique. I point out this down here. You can see I wrote in the 2010 auction. This piece went for $42 million. Not that money matters, but that may creep in to some of the conversations we have in this class, is how the value of these works has exploded and becomes a commodity in and of itself. Okay. Um, And here, the mirror painting, and here's another one. There are these really beautiful. I think, I think they help us see the rest of what he's doing more clearly. Like he's making these abstractions of abstractions, but in a way, this is already in his mind. This is already an abstraction, even though it's using a representational image, right? So for him, they clearly question the assumption that the function of representational art is to reflect reality. He doesn't think so, right? He thinks that you have to abstract it. And so this is that. This doesn't necessarily have to, even if he's looking at the source material, that the painting itself doesn't have to reflect that reality. So now we'll look at Rosenquist. Rosenquist was born in North Dakota. He became like a billboard painter when he came to New York. He took some classes here, and when he came to New York, he did a lot of massive advertisements on the sides of buildings. So he got used to blowing up images onto a very large scale. For example, this is pretty large. It's like almost 7 feet by 12 feet, 13 feet. And the images are quite large. You can see source material, almost like the cake is almost like it's from a newspaper, a black and white newspaper print, and Kennedy, president-elect, in this just really a gigantic super image, and a car and a vehicle. Here, Love You with My Ford. I'd love for you, right, without me talking right now, how might this be different? To think about this. How might this be different from Andy Warhol or Roy Lichtenstein? I don't know what you thought. He's one of the things I would say is that even here is Rosenquist is inserting himself, right, in taking source material from the culture and positioning it, locating it, displacing it in a way that is indirect because it's personal. He's the one who's the agent there. This is, it doesn't have to be Lichtenstein here, right? That's how he paints, that's his brand, that's his style. But here, Rosenquist is making all the determinants to make the picture be what it is, right? Again, it's not direct the way Andy Warhol did Marilyn Monroe. Rosenquist is displacing it and relocating elements from her name to her facial parts, right? And creating a new pictorial experience. He's still using the stuff of the culture, but he's recombining it and configuring it. They're different. This is a piece that you're going to compare with Drowning Girl. It's painting for the American Negro. And one of the things that clearly by making this painting, he is not shying away from a political reality. This is something that Lichtenstein didn't do, Warhol didn't do, and for the most part, none of the pop artists did. Rosenquist was very different in that regard, and you can even see it here. A piece called F-111, right? It's using this, I show you this gigantic installation, right? You can see the scale of people there. This is a really big piece. And it uses images of an F-111 with this fighter jet, right, juxtaposed and dislocated with images of a little girl getting her hair done, kind of a nuclear explosion, tire treads, massive, tire tracks like from like a tank. Um, and so here we go. This shows you kind of the panels. So one of the things I want you to really think about is the Warhol and Lichtenstein, not that they're the same, but they kind of utilize direct and immediate translation of source material. Whereas Rosenquist here imposes himself on the source material and he filters it using disruption and dislocation as devices, right? So, right, he had to be there to bring the sensual whisper and the spaghetti and the sensual lines of the Ford together, right? It wasn't the same way as just locating a frame in a comic book and representing that. Okay. Anyway, I hope this gets you started thinking about your essay. I'm gonna, have more videos tomorrow. And any questions you have, please post below. Thank you.